Hey folks, thanks for watching. I love this radar loop. This just highlights everything that we look for in terms of summer weather. And really that comes down to the position and the strength of these summertime ridges. And you can see it exemplified here in this clockwise flow around this upper level ridge situated in the Mid-South, maybe near Lexington, Kentucky. That's where I kind of see the center of this clockwise flow. But the stronger storms kind of spinning around that. Saw some of those in Iowa, southeastern Minnesota yesterday with some number of tornado reports. And then on the southeastern flank here, these thunderstorms, they fired here in the Carolinas, and notice that they push east to west. That's not the most common presentation for our storms here in the continental U.S., but nonetheless, on the southern end of that clockwise flow, your prevailing winds are out of the east. And so the storms are going to feel that and go along with that. Now, underneath the ridge, we see a lack of precipitation generally. There were some daytime thunderstorms here over Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but not a ton of precipitation coverage in here. And as a result of this ridge just kind of parked here across the Mid-South in the eastern U.S., we've seen the heat build in days and days and days, consecutive days of heat advisories and extreme heat warnings. The eastern seaboard are at triple digits from D.C., Philadelphia, up to New York, and Boston at times as well. Now, fortunately, this ridge is beginning to weaken, and we're seeing some of those stronger temperatures come down, thankfully. But nonetheless, its influence, apparent even in this radar loop here. If we look at the last 24 hours of precipitation, you can see that pattern, even in the precip field, the strongest precipitation on the periphery of that ridge, so the upper Midwest and portions of the Southeast yesterday, getting up to an inch of rain, if not more than that. Some of these localized areas that fell underneath some of these training thunderstorms, especially here in central and eastern Nebraska, getting up well over 2 inches in some localized areas. Look at the storm reports yesterday. Again, you can still kind of almost see that clockwise flow. Just kind of a great example of that. Some storm reports here in the southeast with those east to west moving thunderstorms. These are wind reports, and then a scattering of tornado reports in southeastern Minnesota. Andrew yesterday morning did a great job forecasting this threat. He really highlighted that. If we look at the upper level height pattern, there's our ridge spinning here over the eastern U.S., right, that clockwise flow, right, prevailing winds over the southeast were out of the east yesterday in the upper levels of the atmosphere, blowing those storms east to west. But one thing I do want to mention with this, if you look near Florida, we have a cutoff flow here, and you can kind of see that spinning counterclockwise. And we're going to see a few of these in the forecast as I step through that. And these cutoff flows add a bit of uncertainty here. When they're positioned here in the Gulf Coast states, they can actually rob some of this Bermuda high moisture from getting up further into the United States. So when they kind of hang around here, I keep an extra eye on them. You'll see me do that in the forecast here today. Did want to mention that one as it stood out on this plot. If we look at the winds at the surface rather than up at 500 millibars, see the southern winds coming up out of the south through the Midwest today, and then the stalled frontal band. You can kind of see it in the weak winds here through southern Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, and this is going to be a renewed focus for storms today. You can just kind of see that on the surface wind plot here this morning. So I jump over and show you the Storm Prediction Center outlook today. Southern plains down through Oklahoma, up through the Midwest, portions of the Corn Belt today highlighted in a marginal risk, so a low chance for significant severe weather. But thunderstorms probably likely in this swath here, and that continues underneath the ridge as it weakens, and then through the southeast today. Florida under the influence of that upper level low as well. And then perhaps an increased tornado risk here. That's the reason they have this little slight risk out. We can see that by jumping over. I apologize, I'll make that bigger. There's that full outlook zoomed in. And there's that highlighted tornado outlook. So folks here in northeastern Iowa, far western Wisconsin, highlighted for a 5% tornado risk. By itself isn't too staggering of a high risk, just given how localized it is, though definitely highlights something the Storm Prediction Center is looking at more closely today. We can see that a bit from the HRRR forecast. I'm going to take this into this afternoon. We see strong thunderstorms firing in the upper Midwest here today. This is 6 p.m. this evening, and the HRRR highlighting that severe thunderstorm risk. Generally across the southeast, though, just seeing more of those daytime thunderstorms going up along the Appalachians and then some of the plains outside of that. Generally, over the next few days, we are kind of waiting for more of a pattern shift, however. So I'm going to blow this up and show you the 500 millibar forecast from the ECMWF. I'm going to make it valid here as about the recording this video about 6 a.m. There's that upper level ridge that we've been talking about. There's that upper level low that we looked at. But we're going to see this transition through the kind of the next 3 to 4 days. I'm going to take it quickly through that. And as I do that, you're going to see this ridge weaken a bit. We do see some higher heights here generally as we go into the day Friday. Now taking it into Saturday, Sunday, Monday, now getting into Tuesday, and really by Tuesday afternoon, that ridge that was here has shifted off to the west. Right, over the northwest, Montana, British Columbia, Alberta. We've replaced it with a trough over the Great Lakes. We actually have a little upper level low. I mentioned these kind of subtropical upper level lows, adding some uncertainty to the forecast. This is likely going to bring some rainfall to the southwest as we go through the work week next week. And then you can't see it here, but that upper level low that was spinning over Florida, it's still kind of generally around here in portions of the southeast as well. So a few things to keep an eye on as we go through the next kind of 4 to 5 days here. I will say, as we see this transition to the northwest flow, we're going to see that risk area for those storms shift a bit. So if I come down here and I'll call this our convective panel here, here's the Storm Prediction Center outlook for today. On Thursday, you can see that risk area that we talked about in Iowa. Tomorrow, as the ridge continues to weaken over the southeast, we see this activity shift back toward the northern plains. As we transition with more ridging over the northwest, we get more of that kind of traditional northwest flow trajectory out of the jet stream. So you can even see on Saturday, activity continuing in the upper Midwest, but it's different than where we were this week with this flow coming around like this. It's more of this northwest flow and perhaps some more proper hail and wind risk with these storms as well. We'll keep an eye on that as they come through this weekend. But I'm going to jump back to that 500 millibar height forecast. I'm going to play that forward Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, well out into next week. This is getting farther into the forecast, but we still kind of see that general northwest ridging, and maybe perhaps next weekend some ridging trying to build back into the middle part of the country. That's well out into the forecast. We'll talk about the details of that kind of near the end of the video. I want to show you the temperatures here. We talked about those coming down. The high temperatures here today contoured. That color is how they depart from their average here for late June. Cooler temperatures across the upper Midwest underneath some of that storm activity, but warm temperatures continuing today in the 90s across the Mid-South and the Corn Belt. Take this into Friday. Boy, look at that backdoor cold front over New England, portions of the Mid-Atlantic, finally bringing those temperatures down. I'm talking highs in the 70s in New York, maybe even below that after hitting triple digits here this week. Saturday, Sunday, see temperatures rebound a bit under that more kind of northwest flow regime with storms coming more so out of the northwest, pushing through the Corn Belt. To Monday, Tuesday, temperatures moderating a bit into Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. Again, without this big ridge situated over the eastern U.S., allowing the temperatures to moderate a bit next week, but increasing those temperatures across the northwest under the influence of that ridge there. If we jump over and look at the precipitation forecast from the ECMWF, let's make this valid about this morning. So there's the overnight showers and precipitation here, eastern Nebraska, far western Iowa. As we go through the day today, that activity shifting off to the east now into this evening. Again, expecting those severe storms more so over the upper Midwest, with weaker storms, although can't rule out some storm reports here over the southeast this evening as well. Florida, seeing precipitation. Let's take this forecast forward into Friday evening. See some of this activity now shifting off into the east, especially over here in the Mid-Atlantic and the southeast. Maybe seeing some Corn Belt precipitation tomorrow afternoon as well in terms of some storms. Really kind of keeping an eye here over the northern plains later tomorrow evening for some significant severe storm development in the Dakotas, northern Nebraska. Take this forecast into Saturday evening, way late Saturday evening, potentially seeing those redevelop here over the upper Midwest. We'll call this the western and northern Corn Belt. And then to Sunday afternoon and evening, that activity shifting off maybe into the central Corn Belt, but continuing precipitation across the eastern U.S. Even though we're transitioning more out of this northwest flow, plenty of precipitation chances through the weekend in this area here. That continues into early next week, Monday evening. Now Tuesday evening with that ridge more situated here over the northwest, less precipitation through the forecast over here, more across the eastern U.S. under that northwest flow regime, potentially laying down some stalled fronts across the southeast, bringing heavier precipitation there. And if I take you back earlier in the forecast into this weekend, I did want to mention the Canadian Prairie, because if I take this even into Thursday evening, you can see some precipitation trying to fill in here, but it's really more so Friday evening. For the Prairie, before we transition into that northwest ridge, getting precipitation chances moving through the Prairie. That's Saturday evening. Now into Sunday, you can see that clearing out. Tuesday, brief kind of clipper-like system over the top, but largely less precipitation through the work week next week than we're going to see this weekend for the Canadian Prairie. Now, if I jump over and show you the 7-day forecast from the ECMWF in terms of precipitation anomalies, you can see that drier area settling in now to the northwest. Generally wetter, active conditions in the eastern part of the country. You're going to see, we'll see tomorrow evening how many of those storms get through the Dakotas, but without that, seeing this area generally go over dry over the next 7 days. Take out the next 4 to 10 days, excluding this weekend, can see later in the forecast period some precipitation trying to fill in here, and we continue the precipitation through the Midwest and the southern plains as well. I mentioned earlier that cutoff low kind of sneaking over California. That's going to, over the next work week, draw some precipitation into the southwest. In fact, I didn't point that out, but if you keep an eye on the southwest here, we have this little cutoff low and this general ridging here. That's not a bad setup for a monsoon. One, you get heat into the northwest that helps pull air up into the American Southwest via monsoon process. And then you have this little low here, just kind of an extra, come on in, just ushering some of this moisture in from the Atlantic and Pacific. So as I take this Tuesday into Wednesday, now Thursday, you can see this area filling in with precipitation from this monsoonal-like, and then man, there's this potential tropical storm here that develops. This is actually on the National Hurricane Center's radar much further south off the screen here, but by all the way next week, at least this forecast from the ECMWF trends to bring that moisture to the southwest. So that would bring a lot of rainfall to that area here as we kind of kick off their monsoon season going into July. And that was the general expectation this year, is that we'd see a stronger monsoon in the southwest. And when that occurs, we typically see more heat in this part of the country. So kind of consistent with that temperature forecast it just showed, with heat increasing over the northwest, with cooler temperatures and more monsoon activity, I should say, over the southwest. Now, I do want to jump over and look at the ECMWF AIFS forecast just briefly here for the 500 millibar height forecast. I'm going to take this quickly into early next week because we're not going to see many material differences from the ECMWF. If I take it to Tuesday, July 1st, there's that upper level ridge across the northwest, that trough across the Great Lakes. There's that little trough across California trying to bring that moisture into the southwest. Northwest flow, thunderstorms continue. Plenty of activity here with more moderate temperatures out late into next week. But the AIFS quickly moves that ridge over into what we'll call maybe central Canada late in the week, would likely return some heat to the middle part of the country. Next weekend, it shifts that all the way over the Maritimes in Canada. We see troughing return back to the northwest, and then some ridging trying to build into the southern plains. Now, this is well out into the forecast. It's even beyond next weekend, so I don't want to put too much weight into it, but it is a scenario that I'm seeing from the models where at least we try to weaken the Bermuda high a bit and enter a more traditional ridge over the middle part of the country. Now, I'm not going to call this, a forecast in Sharpie right now. It's not in permanent marker, but it is one scenario from the forecast where at least we have, heat and potentially dry concerns to talk about getting more into the month of July. Now, I'm fishing for it here because I'll be honest, I don't see a ton of other reason to be concerned going into July yet from this pattern. Even the ECMWF AIFS run here that I'm slightly concerned about is progressive. Watch the trough, ridge, trough pattern here. Trough, ridge, trough. So take this forecast through. It's moving those along, that trough ridge pattern. So even if this ridge builds in here in the subtropics, Texas, kind of into Oklahoma, right, it's even replacing that now with some troughing, potentially some northwest flow through this area. So again, lacking kind of a strong signal for persistent heat and dryness in any one area of the country. Will certainly be hot in some areas like we saw across the Mid-South and the eastern U.S. But if we jump over and look at the Climate Prediction Center forecast for that same area over the next 6 to 10 days, well, now we're slightly above average in terms of temperatures. We take this out 8 to 14 days. I'll make this bigger here. Temperatures coming down in this area here in week 2. Precipitation stays up in much of the country. Boy, look at the southwest here from the Climate Prediction Center, their 8 to 14 day outlook. Again, there's that monsoonal-like activity that we talked about. But I don't see any consistent signal here for heat and dryness to build into any one part of the country. The one area perhaps that I am concerned about, and it's just because of its more near-term nature to the forecast, would be the northwest because of all the ridging that we saw in the forecast here. And so if we look over at the ECMWF ensemble forecast, that's an area generally shifting more so dry than any others. And if I jump over, let's see if I have the ECMWF ENS. That would be the ensemble forecast. Jump that over North America here. There's that 10-day forecast. Again, you can see that highlighting that risk area for the prairie, Montana, maybe North Dakota as well, but generally the eastern part of the country. I'll include the southwest in that. Looking wet over the next 10 days. We can even take that out to 8 to 14 days. We can see this activity continuing. A lot of this monsoonal moisture getting blown up over into the southwest. It typically can get out across the continental divide. Some of that makes its way into the central U.S., and we could see additional precipitation via that, even getting out toward mid-June. But this area is still on the drier side. So we'll have to keep an eye here as we go through the month of July. There are some pockets in here that we'll perhaps need to keep our eye on as the system comes through, but it's always hard to predict where these are going to end up. Just kind of a few days out in the forecast here. One thing I was calling for earlier, and Erica's talking about as well, is the position of the Bermuda High. And if we look at that from the ECMWF AIFS through the weekend here, kind of keeping an eye on this area here and then the Pacific high here. If these start to exit the area, we get more concern for drought. And the AFS does briefly move this Bermuda high over the Azores. That's these little specks here. I know those are hard to see. That's next week on Tuesday. It tries to return it back toward the Bermuda high, but notice the AFS struggles to do that and actually gets replaced by some troughing here. And it quickly shifts back by late next week on Saturday back toward the Azores. And that's why the ECMWF AFS, I mentioned, it was one of the models here trying to bring some heat and drought risk into the middle part of the country, particularly the southern plains initially. Now, it's one run here, the ECMWF proper and the ECMWF ENS, right, didn't show that same risk. I think I just pulled up that ECMWF ensemble forecast that had more precipitation through this area here specifically. But still, portions of Texas perhaps on the drier side, even from that forecast. One thing to watch for now, like I said, this is well out into the forecast here. Don't want to put too much weight into it. But at this point in the part of the season, we're kind of keeping an eye on every signal at this point. In that same vein, if we jump over and look at just trying to get a position for where the MJO might be. Again, the MJO this time of year, not the best signal, but the ECMWF ensemble taking it all the way out from July 6th to the 11th. And we're averaging it to see where is the most ascent in the atmosphere here, and it's telling us that, well, it's over here in the Western Pacific. We're seeing descent here over South America and the Atlantic, and this tends to line up with phases 5, 6, maybe even 7 in the MJO, and those tend to be more consistent in some of our historical climatology here, with ridging over the northwestern U.S., northwest flow over the Midwest, parts of the eastern part of the country, generally favorable for precipitation in this corridor here through the middle of July, but again, highlighting that potential drought risk over the northwest, and we'll see how close some of that gets into the Dakotas, into the northern plains, and portions of the United States. The ECMWF weeklies, I'm playing this loop. I did this on Tuesday. So this is their forecast for the whole month of July in terms of precipitation as it departures from average. And I'm letting it just continuing to show us the more latest forecast. So every day it updates with a new forecast. Restarted the loop there. Now it's updating with the more recent one, and then it stops kind of at the most latest. So right there at the end is that most latest forecast. And the reason I'm doing that is you'll notice it's getting slowly wetter in this area as we approach the month of July. So it starts out very dry here over the central U.S., portions of the middle Mississippi Valley, but as it gets through that, continues to update, I should say, right, we see precipitation values starting to expand west. These driest contours staying over the northwest, highlighting again, kind of sound like a broken record here, some dry risk here. Perhaps some here over southeastern Texas. Notice that that's picking up well. We saw that in the ECMWF ENS too, so got to keep an eye on that here. But generally expecting better conditions in July over portions of the central and eastern U.S. That lines up with the Climate Prediction Center's latest forecast as well. I think that's my last slide here today. I do want to jump over and show you the National Hurricane Center here. Again, this kind of general, I'm going to call it subtropical uncertainty, right? If we get this tropical development here again in the eastern Pacific and that rides up the Mexican coastline, jumps into the southwest, certainly going to produce quite a bit of rainfall here over the Four Corners region, but it adds uncertainty in the rainfall forecast because that can bring precipitation in from the west. So while we're watching that Bermuda high critically this time of year, right, is that going to bring moisture in this way? Well, we could bring some over from the west, which isn't the most typical corridor, but any of these kind of hurricanes, the subtropical lows over Florida, add wrinkles to the forecast that the models struggle with every time, because the models struggle with convection, right? They don't inherently model it and simulate it, at least not the global ones that we're looking at for a 7 to 14 day forecast. They just parameterize it, and that's all to say they're taking their best guess at it as well, and they're not always perfect. But hey, neither are we. For that, I'll leave you here on Thursday. Thanks for watching today, and Eric will be back with you all Friday.